Welcome to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast where seeing things differently inspires limitless possibilities. This podcast is being brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Limitless was created in order to inform, educate, entertain, and share stories from within the blind and partially sighted community in order to show the world that the opportunities for those who are blind or partially sighted are truly limitless. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to your host, the Executive Director and Founder of Blind Beginnings, Shawn Marcellet.
Welcome back to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Marcellet. Thank you for joining us again this week. This podcast is being released the week of Valentine's Day. So our episode is sort of along the Valentine's line. Last February, we released an episode on dating where I talked with two females about what dating's like when you're blind or partially sighted and your partner is sighted. We talked about some of the challenges of meeting somebody, what sorts of things we were attracted to, how to navigate educating the person you're dating about blindness, and a lot more. If you haven't listened to that episode and you'd like to, it's episode number 35. Following that episode, I was contacted by a parent of a child who's blind, saying how much she loved the episode and that it had caused her to have even more questions. She wanted more, which is why we are doing another episode, dating part 2, if you will. And I thought it was important to get the male perspective. So I'm really excited to introduce our guests today, Richard and Grant. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey guys.
Great to be here.
Hi, thanks for being here. Okay, can you start off by introducing yourselves a little bit, your sort of level of vision, how long have you been blind, and what's your relationship status?
Hi, this is Grant, and I've been blind since birth. And currently I have a long-term partner. We've been together for just a little over 4 years now, hard to believe. And she is effectively sighted. She does actually have a little, some vision loss in one eye, but she's sighted enough to drive. So effectively sighted.
So I'm Richard, and I have also been blind since birth, and not totally blind. I have a little bit of residual vision, but I don't use it that much. I did learn Braille and various things as I was growing up. So, and I'm currently married, and we've been married for 5.5 years, almost 6 years. And he is sighted, and he doesn't drive. So we do navigate the city by public transit and other means of transport.
I'm going off script already, but how did you both meet your partners? Are you willing to share that?
Yeah, of course. So I met my partner online. I tried a couple of different dating sites, and I met my partner on OkCupid.
So in my case, I did try a number of dating sites over my time of dating, but didn't meet my partner online. I met him at a friend's party, and the interesting part of the story is when we met, we were friends for a couple of years, and then we started to date. But while we were dating, we realized that we had met each other at a fundraiser for his mom's choir 3 years before we saw each other at the friend's party. So it was kind of interesting, and then we dated for a couple of years and then got married. So,
oh wow! So you were just destined to meet.
We were, and I can get into it a bit later in the show, but basically when we met at his mom's choir's fundraiser, I did like him, but I wasn't out yet, and so I didn't pursue it.
Ah, okay, that's a good story. I feel like.
Yeah.
So let's talk about pursuing somebody. Maybe it's 2022. I don't know. And I've been married now and with the same person for how long? 11 years. So, I don't know what it's like to be dating right now, honestly, but is it still sort of the male pursues female? And if so, how does that work if the male is blind?
So I would say, thinking back about maybe 10 years or so ago to my university days, that was a little bit tough, because the partner that I was dating at the time, I met in just in our dorm, and I had really no idea kind of how to pursue her, how to express interest. We were friends, but I didn't really know how to move past that. And I kind of asked a couple of people for advice, and they mentioned that, you just have to be straight up. You just have to talk to her and say, I think you're really cool and I'm interested, and maybe seeing if we can go on a couple dates and yada, yada. And that's essentially what I did. In this climate, I think things are really changing. And in fact, the quote unquote like wisdom that I've read on the internet is that it's actually becoming a little bit less appropriate to pursue people in your dorm or in your classes, or on the transit or in the mall or anywhere other than places that people specifically go to look for a relationship, like a bar or an online dating site, or maybe a party. Now, I think for people who have done that and are now in happy relationships, I think that's fantastic. I certainly wouldn't knock that. But if I was doing it now, I may be a little bit uncomfortable doing that kind of face to face. And I do think a lot of those gender roles are starting to change, maybe a little bit slowly. But I think both genders are now, if you feel comfortable looking for a relationship, I'd like to think that we're becoming on more equal footing now.
Do you think, though, if you could see each other, say you're on transit and you see somebody you like and they see you, and I don't know how sighted people do that, but the eye contact and the smile and where it's mutual, does that still happen, do you think? Or do you think blindness plays into this a little bit? Like if you were to pursue a stranger in a setting that's not set up for dating, you have no idea going in whether there's going to be a positive response or not as well, right?
Yeah, and I think nowadays, because there's the society's the rules are changing so much that I would think I kind of think even for sighted people, that's kind of dealing that, they make eye contact and smile at someone that you're pursuing, maybe like you might
Creepy.
want to do it more cautiously, because you don't know how the other person is going to react as well too, because it's the roles and how things are done are changing so much. I think in some ways, in the past, I think it was more acceptable, but as a blind person, especially a blind person pursuing same sex relationships, it was a bit of a challenge knowing whether the person you're pursuing was also interested as well too, unless they showed some real if they actually demonstrated some activities that might be demonstrated in a way that actually might show that there was some interest as far as what they said and how they conducted themselves as well too.
Well, I mean, How do you know if somebody is gay or straight, or there's that too, right? Like
you don't, and like because I know when I was younger and before I was out, you miss, and even at the bars, you miss all those signals, the eye contact, the body movement, and all that stuff, and it was really difficult to find people that were either interested in you or that you were interested in as well too. So it was definitely more difficult. That was partly why I reverted to doing things online and going to more structured social settings as well too. But even then, it was strictly luck of the draw. Like when I met my husband, it was we were like initially at this party, even before we realized that we had met each other before. We didn't it was really sort of it happens slowly and really organically. Like it just all of a sudden we started talking to each other, and next thing you know, we're dating, and years later we're getting married and we're still together. So it wasn't forced.
So
Yeah.
at that party, did you know he was gay when you first started talking to him?
Oh yeah, it was partly because it was a gathering of gay men that came out later in lives, and so that's how we knew for sure, because it was gay men specifically that it was a gathering. So yeah, I knew, and he knew I was gay, and then things like that, and
that's helpful.
Yeah, so that was helpful, but in a public setting, it's definitely more of it's definitely more of a challenge to determine whether, especially if you're interested in same-sex relationship or people that have the similar gender expressions as you do as well.
Mm-hmm.
From sort of a heterosexual perspective, there's this kind of there's a feminist community that I've been reading lately that's really kind of helped educate me and change some of my assumptions and perspectives that I've had. And one thing that a lot of people say is, traditionally, if you run into a woman at the mall or the transit or wherever, and she seems like she's being polite and friendly and just a warm person, a lot of people will take that to mean that she's really into you, even if she's just literally sort of trying to be polite. And on the other hand, women who are not even being rude, but they're just sort of like, you know what, I'm kind of in a rush right now, that kind of thing, are interpreted to be very rude and unkind by guys. So, every now and then you hear about someone who kind of meets someone else in like these crazy set of circumstances. You're on the side of the road and, or whatever, you're passing by, you notice their car is broken down or whatever, and you sort of help them with it, and it turns into a conversation and then a coffee date, and before you know it, you're happily married. But oftentimes
in the movies, maybe
that's actually a story I read.
Okay.
But a true story. But more often than not, people, from what I understand, don't love to be hit on in public. But it does make it a little bit tricky, because I think online you have a little less of a chance to make a first impression if you have a disability than someone meeting you in real life and realizing that you're a cool person.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, because as Grant was saying, I was thinking about, like, sometimes you might, like, whether it's same sex or it's a man and woman, like you might mistaken the woman's sort of niceness, like as you were saying, and like and it's someone that's really helpful for you, and they're the nice person, and then you make that initial step, we'd like to go for a coffee, and then it just changes the whole interaction, because they just, like, you've made an assumption that they didn't intend. They were just really being nice, and they had no interest in getting to know you in that sort of relationship. So like you almost have to let that being nice sort of last a little longer, and then see, like, especially if they keep interacting with you, then sort of pursue it as you get to a point where you think you might be friends, and then sort of move to that next, let's go for a coffee stage, and do something in a public place together, and then see how it goes from there. But it's I think as a blind person, it might be that it's a longer process. Like if it was two-sighted people, like in the case of the person coming to help you fix your car on the side of the road, you might be able to pick up from their how they're making eye contact and how they're smiling at you, that they might actually have more of an interest in you than just helping you fix your car.
So how can you tell? Do you both feel like, because that sounds really hard, like, and I totally understand from the women's perspective, just because you're friendly doesn't mean you're interested and all of those things. But then how do you know if somebody's interested? Or do you? Yeah. Like, it's just a gamble every single time?
it's definitely more of a gamble at pretty much every time. In a public setting, it's probably less of a gamble in places where we were talking about earlier, like online dating or at a pub or some sort of social gathering that was meant for people to possibly meet each other.
Yeah, I think that it is somewhat a gamble. I think that absolutely okay to express that you're interested in somebody, even without those visual cues, just as long as you're being respectful. And I absolutely have had people in my past who I maybe would have pursued something with, where, after the fact, someone will say, wow, their body language, really indicated that they were attracted to you, or wow, you kind of missed the mark here on this one, and I just hadn't been thinking of it at all. So and quite the reverse too, that someone will just be nice. They think I maybe look lost, and they've come over to help me, and I may interpret it the other way. So yeah, unfortunately, I think it is harder without that body language, but it's certainly very much doable.
Interesting, the coming over to offer help. Like, do you feel like being blind can be a pickup tool? Does it work?
It possibly in the right circumstances. I always remember when I was a lot younger, especially when I used to have guide dogs, and I got my first guide dog. They like, and this is before any of my friends knew that I was gay, and like everyone's like, it's the dog is going to be you'll have any date that you want, and to a certain degree it was, but it really was about the dog, in my opinion. Like it was more the dog. A guide dog is a good icebreaker, but it's the interest that someone you think the person has in you might be more about the dog part in the end as well. And you have to kind of have to navigate that as well too, to determine okay, you have to really quickly determine, was it really about the dog, or are they genuinely interested in me? And does the dog factor into it, because they're a dog person as well, and they just love people that have dogs as well too. Whereas with the white cane, well, to be honest with you, I probably had more dog dating experience than white cane experience. So I really don't know. So Grant's probably better at the white cane part.
Yeah, I can't overly say that I've ever felt that being approached and offered help or standing out because of my white cane was really an advantage in the dating scene. If anything, I tended to feel that those, oftentimes those experiences can be a little bit stressful because you're lost, you're trying to get your bearings or what have you. And it doesn't immediately sort of jump to my mind that like, oh, I'd really like to interact with this person again.
Yeah.
So I'm not as convinced. I think Richard is probably correct that if you're meeting a dog person, you've got a dog, you start up a conversation. I mean, that's tricky too, because sometimes you don't want your dog to be distracted from the work that it's supposed to be doing. But I think that's going to be a very individual experience. I can't say it's really been my experience that it's been helpful.
I don't think it's really much of a pickup tool on the female end either. So that makes sense. I'm just curious, when you were doing online dating, did you disclose that you were blind in your profiles?
So I didn't in my profile because I kind of thought, well, I didn't want people I didn't want to screen out anybody just because they saw the word blind and they would just move on. But what I did do was initially in the sort of chatting back and forth, through the dating platform chat function, like whether it was OkCupid or Plenty of Fish or something like that. I disclosed it pretty early in the conversation because I did have a bad experience where I forgot to, and was in the process of arranging for a date, and then realized that we hadn't had that conversation yet, and then had the conversation, and that brought the whole potential sort of love interest or dating interest to an abrupt end, because I was basically accused of lying to the person, and I wasn't really lying. I'd withheld information. I really had forgot about it, because we were having texted back and forth, and then I got comfortable enough to exchange. Back in the day, you still exchange phone numbers, and we had chatted a few times, and finally kind of said, okay, let's meet at this time, and we're at this place, and that's when I realized that it's like, oh my, I forgot to tell him that I'm blind. And because I had, when I was much younger, tried not saying anything at all, and then showed up with white cane or guide dog, and it's just, and that made it more awkward. So I always I didn't want to put it in my profile, but I dispensed with it very early on in any meeting and discussion. And in the case of when I met my current husband, it was pretty obvious. Like he saw the guide dog, and it was pretty obvious, and so it was at a gathering, and he came and said hi, and because we were kind of all mingling through the room, so he approached me and said hi, and we just, like I said, started chatting, and next thing you know, we're getting married. And but he said the thing that attracted him to me, it wasn't like he didn't really care about the blindness part. He just loved my laugh, and because I was talking with another friend, and I can't remember what we were talking about, but obviously it was funny, and so he wanted to come, and he said he just thought I was this really happy person.
It's so interesting that that person accused you of lying because you didn't share this, this fact about yourself. Like, anyways, that's
yeah.
Infuriating. Like, I feel like, do they feel they are owed I don't know. That's just really interesting.
Yeah, my guess is they felt that they were owed that explanation right off the bat, and so I that was my learning, as we call them at work, my learning moment. Right. And then so I didn't want to change my profiles to include it in my profile, but I wanted to dispense with it as early as possible in any conversations.
What about you, Grant? Did you disclose?
So I took the polar opposite approach that you did, Richard. And I should mention that I completely agree with the point about just unfortunately screening a lot of people out by mentioning blindness right off the top. And that's something that I was aware of. But because I'm maybe not I don't have enough self-confidence really to let that not bother me. I think those rejections that I kind of always heard about from other people, where you get to this point where you disclose, someone kind of felt like you sort of dropped a bombshell, and then suddenly the conversation is at an end. I had a photo which clearly showed me and my white cane in my profile, and I very prominently mentioned that I was blind. I mentioned that, I'm working, that I live independently, et cetera, et cetera. But that was something that I mentioned right off the top, and they tried to make sure that my matches actually read through my profile as well, so that they were aware. I kind of wonder if whichever approach you choose, I kind of get the sense that it makes sense to disclose at least before meeting the person, because I don't feel like it's lying to not, but I guess I would view it as, look, should it matter? No, but it is something that affects your life. Dating, I guess, is about being vulnerable and just kind of throwing it out there. And I would consider it too big a thing about myself to leave out.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I met my husband online as well. And I tried it both ways. And I did have the situation of, I would always try to say it early on as well, but I didn't have it on my profile initially. And I had just one person, after like a back and forth twice, me telling them and them disappearing, I was like, okay, I can't handle that. So then I started disclosing, but I wasn't as bold as you, Grant. I didn't have a photo of me with a white cane. I think I said visually impaired. So I tried to sort of downplay it a little bit. And I also spun it in a positive, kind of, there's a lot of perks dating me. I can't see if you're having a bad hair day and we can get into the movies 2 for 1. And, I sort of made it jokey and lighthearted, but yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's a really good approach.
Yeah, it worked.
That's a neat approach too. Yeah, because it's with that's all true too as well. So like I don't know if my spouse is having a bad hair day unless he tells you I'm having a bad hair day today.
Right? They always look perfect in your mind. Yeah. What about not driving as the male? I sort of feel like being the blind female in a heterosexual relationship is, there's sort of that stereotype. Maybe not as much now, maybe it's changing, but where the man drives. Certainly my dad always drove when I was growing up. So I never felt like if you're going to ask somebody out that I don't have the pressure of having to pick them up. Did you feel that, Grant, when you were dating?
Yeah, I would say yes, to be honest. That, I mean, look, should those gender roles matter? No. Is it kind of a bruise to my ego that I can't drive? Yeah, a little bit to an extent. And I think that it's that one sort of thing that we haven't quite cracked yet, driving and flying. I'm sure within our lifetimes we will, but it is more than just those gender roles too. I mean, it's a question of, for example, my partner and I like to go away to the Okanagan, and that's about a several hour drive. And that's not really something where we can just sort of, take turns. Hey, I'll give you a break. I'll get behind the wheel,
Mm-hmm.
So having her, to have my partner be responsible for the driving, and in some cases planning the transportation, even if we're together and taking the transit, is certainly something that I wish I could change. But it is what it is. And, when you find the right person, that's something that you'll work through together.
I think my husband only has a problem when we both want to have a few drinks and he has to drive. Yeah. So that's when I notice, but we just take transit, right? In those situations so that he can have some drinks too. Of course, I don't drink for any of those younger listeners listening.
And that's just it, right? Is that you end up with those situations where we can drink and our partners maybe cannot, unless we put some thought into planning the transit outing. So,
yeah. And as I was mentioning earlier, neither one of us drives. So in our case, it's it's almost like in the situation where your listeners, like that, if you're considering dating another blind person, that's kind of what we do. We end up doing, because we basically and when it comes to living out, doing things outside the house, it is like two blind people, because neither one of us drive, and so we always take public transit or cabs or Uber or Lyft to anywhere in the region, even when we go on holidays. Like we use the public transit system for going to other cities or go to places that are walkable as well too. And so it's that, yeah, from our standpoint, like that's the big difference. But I with same-sex related, there's not that gender, but I still kind of felt like if I was dating somebody that drove, and when I did do it before, I always kind of like it was hard to sort of get it out of my head that they're making sure that they didn't feel responsible for me getting me home or back to wherever we'd met as well too. So I always tried to make sure that I could get to and from the venue, and if they were coming to my house, if it got to that point, that and I was going to their place, that I always tried to make my way there. And then if they offered me a ride home, it was more because they were interested in me, or they were just we had become good friends, even if things romantically didn't work out.
That's just it's interesting because as a woman, when I was meeting people initially dating, I wouldn't want to usually I wouldn't want to go in their vehicle anyway.
Yeah.
Just out of safety.
I didn't do it. And that's the same thing, like even in same sex, and especially if you're the person with a disability, I didn't go in someone's vehicle until I kind of felt comfortable enough being around them in public situations as well too.
Yeah.
And then I would do it, but it was because it is risky. Like there's still riskies, and if you're a blind male in same sex related, there's still a risk, and and you have to sort of account for that as well too.
Is there other safety concerns when you're dating, when you're male? I think for women, it's definitely something we kind of have to think about.
I'd say there's some, but they involve like things like, if you're in same sex relationships as males, the general safety issues that every male that's engaging in same sex relationships should be aware of, like safe sex, make sure that you're meeting for the first time in public places, and don't sort of let the person convince you to go to sort of secluded locations and things like that, because like there's always the risk. There's always some risks involved, whether it's that you're good, like that you could get something, or that or it's someone that's potentially going to indulge in homophobic activities, or gay, or what's typically known as gay bashing, like beating you up or something like that. So there's always a bit of a risk, but don't for any of the parents that are listening, I would when your children come out and are comfortable talking to you about it, I don't try not to express any additional concerns than you would if your children were not in same-sex relationships and were sighted as well too.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that girls and women for sure, I think, have safety challenges that, I would be less impacted by. But as Richard said, there's always risk no matter who you are. And I think, some of the tools that I might have used on a first date would be to just, make sure that someone kind of knows approximately where I'm going, approximately when I expect to get back, have that obligatory, cell phone on you, and know how to call, the emergency line, know how that's set up, and really have some familiarity with the location where you're going. I would say, don't do it right at your home, but maybe somewhat close if you can manage that. And as we talked about earlier, just make sure that you kind of know what your exit plan is, whether it's a taxi or the bus. Kind of have an idea of how you're going to get home afterwards. You're not in charge. Your date is not in charge of your transportation.
Yeah.
Such a good point, because if it doesn't go well, that could be so awkward, right?
That could be really awkward. Yeah. And then the other thing too is, like, for the young listeners, just like be open with your parents, and the parents be open with your children, and don't and have that real open, honest conversation about relationships and the online world, because the online world has inherently so many other risks of people pretending to be other people as well too. And if you're really young, it's hard to it's really hard to sort of determine that, like to determine that if you're younger, or for anyone, like it's online dating, it adds a whole other level of risk that I think parents and children should have an open conversation about, and be very open about their online activities, if they are at the age where they're actively trying to pursue a relationship online.
I always would have a phone call before meeting somebody, because I think that in text you can be anybody, right? And I trust my intuition So being able to speak with somebody gave me a better sense of who they were, and just if I felt at all, I don't know. I mean, you can't just go on that, but for me, I do really trust my intuition when it comes to people. So if it didn't feel right, then I would not meet that person.
Oh, that's smart. Well, luckily, I think, these sort of Zoom meetings are becoming like more and more quote unquote acceptable. So I think that may turn out to be our first couple interactions with people for a while anyway. So that's really a good tip. That's something that I didn't do myself, but it's an excellent tip.
Yeah, I same thing. I always made that initial phone call before actually agreeing to meet someone, because it and there's a couple of times I got it wrong. Like we like the phone call went really well, and then I met them. I thought, okay, this is definitely not for me. So, it wasn't sort of a situation where I ended up. I never did that either. I never met someone based on agreed to meet them somewhere based on our text conversations.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask how you know what you're attracted to when you can't see, or how do you figure out what you're attracted to, what you're physically attracted to, or who you're physically attracted to. I feel like sighted folks just are initially, the initial attraction often is something physical from being able to see them. So how is it for you guys?
For me, it's voice. That's a big one, voice. And then if I can get close enough to a person, then I might be able to get a sense of physically what they're like. If like I like to, in my case, I like people that were a bit taller than me. It really depends. It really depends. But I did have to be probably physically close enough to a person to really determine if I was physically attracted. After I sort of got through that, I like the sound of your voice and that part of it.
Yeah, I suppose I would say voice for sure. Kind of a certain, just their demeanor, like a certain attitude that they bring. It's not patronizing. It's just like treating, thinking of both of you as equals. Someone who's fun and open. Yeah, and then I would just say there's kind of a chemistry that's sort of difficult to describe, but I think really depends on an individual person. That when you meet and start interacting with someone, you'll kind of feel whether or not that chemistry is there. So I bet it would be difficult for anyone to kind of draw up like an exact, sort of ideal of what their partner would look like. But it's just more about that kind of chemistry when both of you meet and start to get to know each other.
Yeah, and I think Brad's right. The demeanor and the character of the person really plays a big part of it, and like into it, and that because obviously in long-term relationships, it's got to go beyond more than just the physical attraction as well too. So that for me too is a big part of it. And as I was mentioning earlier, like my husband and I, we had actually met at 3 years before we had met at this friend's party at a fundraiser, and at that particular time I wasn't out, and I went to this fundraiser with some friends that didn't know I was gay, and so my husband, who's now my husband, and I, we sat together for 3 hours chatting, and his demeanor was really something that I was really attracted to at the time. And then as we realized after we were dating that we'd met before, then it kind of made sense to me, because I was attracted to the same exact things about him at this party as well too. And as I more actively pursued him, and friends, a couple of friends tried to do a little bit of matchmaking as well too. So
I'm really curious how society's kind of view of what is attractive might influence what you think you're supposed to be attracted to, especially in your case, Richard. Like, you're roughly the same age as me, a little bit older, but when we were growing up, you weren't seeing gay couples on TV. You weren't, I would assume that, certainly my parents assumed I was straight and treated me as such. Was that your experience? And how does that impact?
So that was my experience. And when I was a lot younger, I tried dating women, but didn't have that level of physical attraction that really was necessary to sustain any relationship. And so because that's what we were told we should be attracted to, and at my age and as well too. So then when I had started pursuing same-sex relationship, I tended to still I tended to look for guys that were more masculine, like me. Like I didn't, because I kind of thought, well, I don't want to date really guys like I'm dating men. I don't want to date anyone that's effeminate. And so I pursued people that were probably that were really didn't show any interest in me. And then when I met my husband, it was he wasn't really exactly what I thought I would be attracted to. But it worked out for us, and worked out for me as well too, because I there were so many things about him that I liked, and the likes definitely outweighed the dislikes. But he wasn't really quite the person that I kind of, in the back of my mind when I was younger than when we met, I could be in a relationship with.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have this idea in our minds of who we're going to be with, and I certainly did not end up with somebody that fit that bill either. So I think at the end of the day, you fall in love with who you fall in love with, and so maybe society should just shut up with their ideas of what we're looking for, right?
Yeah, and I think now, especially now, as you know, the typical gender roles are slowly changing in society, and gender expression, and there's less focus on, you know, the quote unquote perfect body. We're asking people to eliminate body shaming and various things like that. So I'm wondering if, I'm kind of hoping that will change, and that people will open up more to what they're attracted to, whether it's people that have the same gender expression as them, or heterosexual relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with what Richard was saying as well about just the importance of letting go of society's expectations about, you know, who you should be attracted to. Even, you know, being, you know, people are being a little more fluid about their attraction. They're not labeling themselves as just attracted to guys or attracted to girls. It's more sort of fluid and about the individual. And I think that's really cool. I think we're a long way from, you know, eliminating those expectations completely, but hopefully with time, a lot of those stigmas will fall away.
Okay, so this is the question I've been nervous about. So, and this was a question from a parent, which is, otherwise I'd just avoid asking it altogether. But when you can't see the ways people physically interact in romantic relationships, either in real life or in movies, how, and you know, given the fact most things happen behind closed doors, how do you learn what to do and how to do it when it comes to some of the physical stuff?
So I would say that, first of all, the idea that people watch like a romantic movie and there's like this spark and then everything just happens and it's so perfect and seamless, just like it was in, you know, the movie scene, as sighted parents and sighted people know, that's usually not how stuff happens, especially.
What? There's no fireworks when you kiss for the first time.
Yeah, and it's
and
just
the swelling music.
Yeah, it's usually not how it happens, even for sighted people. And I think knowing that is very reassuring, that if you are talking to others or if you're reading about others' sort of first moments with various stages of intimacy, they're usually extremely awkward. And also, as you said, a lot of things happen behind closed doors as well. So a lot of things are kind of discovered by, couples on their own. So it's generally what the media puts out is not 100% realistic. So do I think we're at a disadvantage? Yes, to some extent. And I will never forget one of my first times going on something that I was heavily hinted at was a date. It was like a group date, and there were two couples sitting. I was in high school, and we were sitting watching a movie, and it was super awkward. I didn't really have the guts to kind of speak up and ask if someone could check if it, just describe the movie or whatever. And then as we were leaving, I realized that the other couple next to us had been kissing the whole time. And I was probably maybe expected to do it too, and just had no clue what was even going on. And then at one point, I asked the girl, do you think maybe we could hang out again, this summer? And she's just like, oh, I'm going to be pretty busy for the rest of the summer. So
no.
To say I blew that one would have been an understatement. But I do think that a lot of people just like us learn with their partner. A lot of it is not visual. It's about chemistry and intimacy and touch and physicality. You get the drill. Mm-hmm. So I really don't think that we're at as much of a disadvantage as society would tend to tell us we are.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it wasn't that hard to figure it all out. But I would add that, I didn't know what the equipment looked like.
Right.
Not being able to see the stuff that we were shown at school, the diagrams that, the one-dimensional things. And so I was pretty surprised the first time I encountered the male anatomy, because that's not what I thought it looked like. And so as somebody venturing into this whole dating world, that could have been very intimidating and awkward. And
I would 100% agree with that is something that it cannot be explained. Mm-hmm. It cannot be really demonstrated through diagrams, like you said. It's something that all kids and teens are exceptionally curious about. And I'm not sure there's really an easy way around that until you're kind of in the moment, unless you guys have an answer to that. But that's absolutely true.
No, I'd agree. Because there's nothing that will prepare you ahead of time, even props and things that might look like the anatomy, because it's not going to feel the same. It's just not going to be the same. And every person's slightly different. The anatomy is slightly different. And you might have had, based on the media, preconceived notions of what to expect and how the anatomy is going to look, and then it turns out it's not really quite like that. And so that's the kind of stuff that happens behind closed doors that really you can't get. You definitely, I don't think anyone, like Grant's right, I don't think even sighted people get a true sense of that based on what's in the media, because if you base your first kiss on what you hear in the media, we should have all saw fireworks or something, or at least.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I remember going swimming as a kid and being in the public showers and seeing other women, and because even part of my own anatomy was a surprise. Because when you're visually impaired and you can't really see and everything's blurry and everything kind of looks the same, there's just surprises all around. So I think some of it definitely, or you accidentally walk in on somebody as a kid when you're sighted, and you get a sense of what they look like. When you're blind, that doesn't happen in the same way. So
it's true. Yeah.
No. Let's talk about parents a little bit, because I know there are parents who are listening. So were your parents concerned when you started dating? And if so, what were their concerns?
For me, I came out as as someone that was 38, 39 years old. So it was a bit different when I was younger, they didn't have any concerns about same-sex dating because I didn't tell them. I was very, very quiet about my interest until I had met someone had met someone that it was then and decided it was time to tell my family and friends. So, but their concerns when I finally did tell them were more about safety as far as in being in same-sex relationships, because they still had preconceived notions about, and I shouldn't say preconceived, they still had a lot of concerns about HIV and AIDS, which is a valid concern. Like it's because it's as we get further away from that particular epidemic, and I think young people really need to be more cognizant, and parents need to have that conversation with their young children, if they're teenagers or young adults, children, about being safe. So that was their main concerns. And when I was younger, when they thought I was dating women, it was more about, making sure that I was because I was the male. So like I think there's parents of young girls or young women would probably have more different concerns than say Grant's parents or my parents had it when I was in my late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, I can spell that one out. That was my parents' main concern. Don't get pregnant. That was definitely the thing that they drilled into me. My parents got pregnant when they were teenagers, so they just didn't want me to repeat that.
Yeah.
Grant, what about you? What concerns did your parents have?
So I was raised by a single mom, and I'll be honest, I did not do a lot of dating in high school. But when I did hang out with people from the opposite sex, so I was hanging out with friends, my mom was always pretty permissive. My mom tried to give me good sex ed, which cannot have been easy. And also really just told me to, feel free to let her know if I needed help with something. Like if I was ever, somehow got stranded late at night, I didn't feel comfortable getting into a vehicle, maybe people had been drinking, whatever the situation, like, please call me. I might be, annoyed, but call me and, I'll come and get you. My mom, gave me privacy to chat with people online and use the computer. I completely understand that there are a lot of risks, especially for girls, but for guys too, that parents have to, contend with and think about and worry about. And I think most parents would just prefer that, look, my kid is only thinking about school until he's 25 and whatever, but that's just not the reality. And I think that if you establish yourself as a confidant and someone your child can trust and come to you when they need help, educate them, be, as liberal as you can. I know from, psychology courses that like abstinence only education does not work. It doesn't produce the effects that we hope it does. I think just being as open to them dating as you can. I think parents who try and be too strict, you run the risk of either your kids becoming sneaky and not telling you about stuff, including if you are in trouble and need help, or, in the case of like what you were saying, Shawn, I know there are heartbreaking stories where, perhaps someone's been abused. They come home, they tell their parents, and the answer is, well, you're not supposed to be this kind of a kid who gets into trouble like this, which is like very far removed from a response that is really appropriate and helpful. So, but I think the biggest thing my parent did for me that I would hope other parents do as much as they feel safe is just being there for their kid, educating their kid, and knowing that there'll always be someone their child can trust to go to.
And I think the other, like the Grant made a good point, like, but even if your the kids aren't dating or actively like in it, but they are going out socially with friends and things like that, to work with them to make sure that they have an exit plan that you can support and that you can be part of if they need you to be as well too, to get home safely from parties and events, and don't be too angry if they don't tell you, if they end up getting home an hour or two later than you expected them and things like that, or like when I was younger, sometimes I wouldn't. If I would go away to other cities and things when I was in my 20s, like I sometimes wouldn't phone and then I'd hear about it after. But don't be too upset if they decide not to, but try to work with them to make sure that they always have an exit plan and know where they are.
Richard, I'm maybe putting you on the spot a little bit, but I mean, I'm raising a child. He's only 8 and he's just, grade 3. They're starting to have crushes and things. And he's asked me about, what is a crush, mommy? And I've just said, well, that's somebody that you maybe, would like to kiss, is how I've described a crush to him. And he's like, ew. So he's like not there at all.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure he knows that whoever he chooses to love is totally fine with me. But it's, a lifetime of this sort of man-woman thing. So it's always, anytime marriage comes up and, well, when you meet somebody, if you decide you want to get married, it's always sort of he or she, or, I try to throw that in. But do you have any other advice so that, parents can just be really make sure that their kids know that they're accepting of whoever they become and whoever they choose to love?
Yeah. So I think if you're if you're a parent and your child expresses interest in doing things that are maybe not part of what you think is normal, or I hate the word normal, but typical behavior for someone of that gender, allow them to explore those interests and things as well too. So if your boy likes playing with with the dolls and things, or they want to dress up in things that look a little look like frilly and girl like, let them do it. And but I think the school curriculum now is a lot more gender diverse than it ever was when Grant and I were, and you were in school as well too. So because back then it was male, female, and the sex ed was very it basically did portray typical gender roles and things like that, and not just the sex ed, even the family education that we had in school back then. So I think the school curriculum now is more reflective of what society is. So if they come home and talk about learning about someone that was transgendered, have that conversation with them and don't discourage that conversation.
Thank you so much for joining me, you guys. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate your openness and just sharing a topic that's really personal. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thanks for having me. I'm just glad to be part of this.
You've been listening to Limitless. If you have a question, a comment, a future topic request, please send us an email to limitless@blindbeginnings.ca. Please leave us a rating, a review, share our podcast with a friend, and join us next time.
This podcast has been brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Music for this podcast is composed by Shawn Bishop and Clement Chow. Production and audio editing by Rob Minot. For more information about Blind Beginnings and the work it does to support children and youth who are blind and partially sighted, along with their families, visit us on the web at www.blindbeginnings.ca, and also remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.